Main event of the evening.
It's Tuesday, and you're listening to Murder Unscripted.
What is up, crime crew? Welcome to episode 66 of Murder Unscripted, the most immersive true crime podcast on the internet today. I'm your host, longtime crime producer Ed Hydock, along with my bestie, the illustrious Melissa Spivey.
I don't know what that word means.
Sunday Night Glow? No, that's illuminated.
Is it a good thing?
Yeah, it's good. It's good.
I was thinking industrious, and I was like, I don't
No,
think
you're not that.
works.
No.
No. Okay.
Well, Melissa, today we are wrapping up our small town secrets block, and I have to say this month we have learned so much about what tragedy can do to these tiny, close-knit communities, and just how fear can often hinder police investigations. Fear of the perpetrators, fear of being labeled a snitch, or just the fact that some people like to keep to themselves and not get involved in things that don't concern them.
Yeah, I mean, they say snitches get stitches, but I'm a snitch all the way, so what do I know?
The snitches also get reward money, so
Exactly. And I'll be snitching my way to the bank.
Well, if you tuned in last week, you heard the real story of David Wellington Reed, the version that has never appeared on TV or any other podcast. And that was regarding the 13-year-old paperboy who went missing while out on a bike ride and whose bones were found on a remote hillside 4 months later. And even though everyone in town had their suspicions about who was responsible, the case remained unsolved for 23 long years. That is until a dedicated cold case detective picked up the file and identified a Schuylkill Haven resident, Joe Geiger, as the person who killed David for allegedly stealing his pot plants. And today, Murder Unscripted is proud to welcome for a conversation that very cold case detective, our friend, Corporal Robert Betnar.
Thank you so much, Ed and Melissa. Thanks for having me on here tonight.
You are awesome, man. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
We appreciate you being here. You've never done a podcast, right?
This is my first podcast.
Wow. Are you nervous? Are you just, I don't know what to expect? Are you in that mode?
No, it's all good. So Murder Unscripted. So can't wait to hear the questions that you ask. And, it's amazing. 40 years ago it's been since David's has been murdered. And we're coming right up on top of that. And People say that, you have two deaths in life. You have your natural death where your body dies. And then you have the last time that somebody says your name, your memory. And here it is 40 years later, Murder Unscripted, keeping David's memory and spirit alive, which I think is a great and wonderful thing for him and his family.
Absolutely. And we actually timed this. Like you and I had talked about this months ago. And then we're like, you know what? August 21st would be the 40th anniversary. And David's case came out on the 19th. So we really tried to time it as close as we could as a nice little tribute to David.
Right.
No. Perfect. Well, no, this is
amazing.
Great timing. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, before we kind of get into, I do want to talk about David's case today, but I want to go back to the beginning first because you grew up actually not terribly far from where David's case took place, right? From Schuylkill Haven.
I did. So I live about an hour away, and David died. He was about 14 years of age, and I think he's about 2 years older than me. So David's actually older than me. So I've been around like 11 or 12 when this happened, about an hour north. I grew up in Luzerne County in Swarsville Borough.
Excellent. So tell me about your upbringing in Luzerne County. So I don't think I've ever asked you about your parents, your childhood. Like, talk to us about where you came from.
Yeah, this is a solid middle class upbringing. My mom worked for Bell Telephone. My father was a laborer, construction worker. He got sick when I was in 5th grade, a massive heart attack.
Oh my God.
Ended up dying when I was younger. But interestingly enough, eventually I get into a career of law enforcement, but nobody in my family was a cop. I didn't know any cops growing up. But no, it was, still close with a lot of my friends from that era. So it was like a small, tight-knit community, much like Schuylkill Haven was.
Totally. Well, did you always want to become an investigator? Like even at the time you were young?
No, it's interesting. I'm a big reader, so there are certain books I think that had an influence on me. One being Truman Capote's In Cold Blood was certainly an influence.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to throw a question at you guys.
Yeah.
I believe it was 1991. Can you tell me the only horror film that ever won Best Picture, an Oscar for Best Picture?
Silence of the Lambs.
Silence of the Lambs.
Damn.
So 1991, Silence of the Lambs comes out, which did not influence my career in law enforcement. But man, that spawned a lot of interest in serial killers, the behavioral science unit with the FBI. And I would devour books written by John Douglas and Bob Ressler, who worked in the behavioral science unit for the FBI. So, just being a reader, I thought this was something I thought was neat. It was interesting. I'd like to be involved in. It'd be challenging. And then from there, I started taking some classes in criminal justice. I did an internship at a district attorney's office, and that kind of led me on my career path, so to speak.
It's interesting you bring up Bob Ressler, because some of these cases, when we get into the older cases or the serial killers, they came up as profilers. And I don't know if you heard, I believe you listened to the interview we did with Kurt Mail, who's another cold case detective, but he mentioned that they don't even call it profiling anymore. I think that's just because of the way the world is now. We don't like to use that word. But I think it's like an analysis unit or something.
Yeah, I think it went from the behavioral science unit to the behavioral analyst unit, like BAU, I believe it is now. When I was on the job, I think it was the behavioral science unit, but they were criminal profilers. That's what they call them.
So how did you eventually then break into the Pennsylvania State Police? Like when did you start, and kind of what were your basic assignments?
So I applied, I think, back around like 1997. There was a hiring freeze for a while, so I didn't get on until I was 24 years old. So I got on with the goal to be a criminal investigator. That was always my goal, not to get promoted, not to make the rank. It was just to be a crime guy. And in my mind, I had a number. The number was 5 years. I wanted to do 5 years on patrol. So I learned how to talk to people. I learned how to handle incidents, that I can have a jury trial, that my first trial wouldn't be a homicide, that I got a good understanding of the job. And I remained very active in those first 5 years for patrol duties. And then after that, right around that 5 year mark, I started applying to be a criminal investigator. So the goal was always to do that. So then I think at the end of the day, 17 out of my 26 years was spent as a criminal investigator, 17 or 18 out of all those years. So
why did you make that your goal? Was that just you like solving puzzles? You like just the challenge?
Yeah, so I did that internship. I met a number of really good investigators, Gary Capitano, Gary Swarren, Tino Andrioli, Dan Yersha. I would watch a bunch of homicides with these guys. They took the time during the breaks to tell me, as the trials were unfolding, what was going on, why the questions were being asked, what was their strong parts of their case, the weak parts of their case. There was a lot of strategy involved. I was going to autopsies at the age of 20. So it was just something I had immersed in at a very young, age, an impressionable age. And I knew I looked up to these guys, and, that's what I wanted to do. So, and I loved it. So I never wanted to leave crime or get promoted or have a desk job. I always wanted to stay active as an investigator. And I did right to the end.
Wow. So I imagine that cold cases are the ultimate challenge for a detective. I mean, there's a ton of challenges that don't exist in an active investigation. Is that fair?
Yeah, I'll say this. Some people might cringe when I say it, but a homicide a lot of times is an overrated investigation, because you're going to have a major case team. You're going to have all the resources. You're going to have a body. You're going to have a murder weapon. You're going to have, wounds on the body. You're going to have a history. Now we have cameras. We have cell phones. We have all those resources that are available there. In David's case, he didn't have a body for 4 months, which really, handcuffed us. Yeah. And I know towards the end of my career, I was working on a cold case, Alanka Khan, where she was missing for 47 years, and we never found her. We never had a body. So it presents these huge challenges.
That's a whole other can of worms. Alanka's case, like I think at some point we would like to do something with that, but man, I would love to see it resolved. Not as much as you, I know, but I mean, this is coming to that coroner's inquest opened our eyes to a lot of stuff.
Right. Yeah, a lot of good work was done in that case.
Yeah.
So given that you kind of grew up in the area, were you aware of David's case, like when it happened? Do you remember hearing about it?
No, never heard of it. And in fact, maybe like a year before David, when we started reopening and working on David's case, Schuylkill County, the Pottsville Republican, they did a news article, the top 10 unsolved homicides in Schuylkill County, and David's case was not even mentioned. Because it was never ruled to be a homicide. It was always an equivocal death. So David just his case never got the recognition that it deserved when he had a little boy that was 13, 14 years old that went missing. And it just kind of, I don't want to say got brushed aside, but even the media, never, pursued that or ask questions about it. So, but no, so even up in Luzerne County, never heard about it.
Why do you think that was? Was it his social class?
I just think because it was never ruled a homicide. So I think they had a strict thing, like the top 10 unsolved homicides. So David's was an equivocal death. Depending who you talk to, they would say he died of juvenile diabetes, which was what the anthropologists were equivocal in that response or in that diagnosis. They said, we believe it might have been this, but some people jumped on that and said it was this, that it was a natural, causes or whatever. But no, so he never got the recognition. And Melissa, to be honest, too, in Luzerne County in 1985, we might have only had 7 or 8 murders a year, maybe less than that.
Wow.
But they were a big deal when a homicide happened. I think the most famous one we had or infamous, I want to say it was famous, was the George Banks homicide, where a number of children were murdered in a mass murder incident back, I believe it was 1981.
I don't remember that.
So whenever there was a homicide, it was always a big deal because there just weren't that many of them. But certainly something from Schuylkill County to reach a 12-year-old boy in Luzerne County, never happened. So no idea about it.
When you finally made it as an investigator, how did it come to be that you were handed David's case?
There was a retired trooper, John Bordenaro. He went to a union meeting. So John had this case initially many, many years ago. At this point, 20 years ago or 20 years ago. And he said the case haunted him at nighttime because sometimes he couldn't sleep. It kept him up. And he approached a Manny De Leon, who was a crime trooper, and asked if he would take a second look at the case. And Manny was just finishing up a homicide, another cold case murder. And I guess he asked if he could open up David's case. And we're like, well, how about just one at a time? We're not going to give you 2. I mean, it's going to be a lot of work. And he made an arrest on his first case. And then he got promoted, and I kind of took his position. And so I more or less inherited David's case. But I felt very lucky to have gotten that case, and I remember I took it home the first day I had it. I was poring over and looking it over and trying to come up with my ideas about the case. But I felt very blessed to have had the opportunity to represent Dave and his family.
So this block of stories we called Small Town Secrets, and David's case was like the motivation for that. So Joe Geiger's name appeared in the 1985 case file, but we know that it took more than 2 decades to get him. What do you think it was about Schuylkill Haven that fueled that everybody kept it so quiet?
There's so many theories when we first got this case. And the one prevailing one was that where David's body was found, there was a home along Caldwell Street where allegedly there was a party, and people felt that David may have been at that party. And wouldn't you know it, Dave's older brother, who was deceased at this time, died from diabetes, right. Which also fueled, I think, the juvenile diabetes theory. Would actually lived at that residence for some time.
Oh, wow.
And we never appreciated that he was at a party because we think people would have talked and it would have come out. And I think at the end of the day, what the investigation showed, it was a very isolated incident. Maybe 2 or 3 people that were present, maybe 4 people. Not many people were present when the actual murder happened. Mm-hmm. So it led to a lot of rumors and speculation, I think, over the years as to who the killer was. People had strong beliefs, but they didn't know for sure who did it. And John Fry and Joe Geiger weren't the type of people that were going to go around and broadcast what they saw or, what they did. It just weren't those types of people.
It's interesting you bring that up because when we did our production of David's case last week, I left out all the other people that were suspected of being there because they were never charged. I didn't really drag them up, but that is a good point because there were 2 other people that could have maybe been there.
Right. So, and we were never able to verify that, so.
Sure. Well, so talk to me about David's upbringing, because, when we do all these shows, the ones that you've helped us produce before, productions always sugarcoat things. But when you get down to the nitty gritty, like David was a bit of a latchkey kid, I think. Is that a fair statement?
I think a lot of us were back then. Even
that's exactly right.
And if the listeners out there don't know what a latchkey kid was, it was your parents in the summer months, 8 o'clock in the morning, get on your bike, come back for lunch, or you went over a friend's house for lunch. Yep. And then you went back out and don't come back home until it was time for dinner. And so you played tag or games or baseball or whatever it was. Yeah, I would agree with that. That David was, that kind of kid. Loved his bicycle.
Mm-hmm.
He had a job for a young kid. He was delivered newspapers for the Pottsville Republican. In fact, he was found. His remains were found, and one of the ways they were able to identify him was wearing a Pottsville Republican T-shirt. He had his father tragically died when he was only a year old in a car accident on State Route 61, which is one of your main routes that runs through Schuylkill County. And so David had an older sister, Virginia, Ginny, an older brother, Jim, who lived at home, an older brother, Joe, the one brother we discussed who died of diabetes, and then the mother was at home. So he went to Schuylkill Haven. I think he was in 7th or 8th grade, 6th grade. He dreamed of being an airline pilot.
Yeah.
He had an infectious laugh, I was told, a smile. The pictures he had, like the bowl haircut, which a lot of boys had back then.
He was so cute.
Yeah, but when he died, so we had you look at David's picture. He has the plastic glasses on. He has the bowl cut. But when he died, he had a buzz cut. So a lot of parents, when you were growing up in that age, when in the 80s, some kids they'd call it peach fuzz, or they would skin your head so that you didn't have to get a haircut the rest of the year. It just wouldn't bother, with you. So he had that type of haircut, and his glasses were down when he went missing.
I didn't know about his buzz cut. I knew about his glasses. I think I was reading in the report that he lost them at Lake Winona, I think, or at the dam.
I believe you're right. Yeah.
Crazy.
So, but he was liked by a lot of kids, and he was always seen on his bike driving around town. They said a very loving kid, had a lot of positive energy about him. It was a big loss for that community, I think.
I do too, and I think despite the fact that he was left alone a lot and kind of just out to do his own thing, David's family did love him dearly.
Oh God, yeah! And a lot of times when he was out and about away from the home, I mean, he would be visiting his brother Joe. He'd be visiting Virginia. He'd be visiting family. So he just wasn't out, up and involved in mischief. He was, visiting people and plus his friends, and so.
Right.
So when he went missing, I feel like there was a very quick police response, which the 80s kind of seems to be, oh, they're just a runaway. They'll come back. Why do you think they were so on top of this?
I think you'll even see that, well, things are different today. So when a kid goes missing, it's, I think, a much different response today. I mean, you have that Amber Alert that's been implemented. In the past, some people would say they had to wait 24 hours before they could declare them a missing person. Now it's immediate. There's no, if someone's reported missing within, an hour, they're being entered in a database as a missing person. We are taking DNA samples now when children are reported missing. That could be a toothbrush or a comb or a brush. That wasn't being done in the 80s. I mean, that's really more recent, maybe the past 5-10 years. Mm-hmm. But, David came from a lower middle class family and, like I said, like a latchkey type person. And he went missing and probably didn't get maybe the initial response that you would think because they thought he was a runaway or missing person. He'll show up in a day or two.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that the fire department came in so quickly because that was very prominent. They said the fire department helped police search. They were almost like the first on the scene.
Yeah, I think what might have spawned all that would have been when they found his bicycle, because Dave would never leave his bicycle, and the bike was found in wood and an area by the train tracks, like in the weeds, like hidden. And I think that's sort of people thinking that, okay, something like nefarious happened, like this might not be just a runaway, like this isn't right. And then I think that spawned that response with the fire department and police. And a lot of people did search for him back then at that time.
So we know that David was eventually found up on that hillside, and Ed and I went there, and it's kind of treacherous. I refused to go down the one hill because I was like, I'm not going to fall and break something.
I'm glad you said no because I didn't want to pick your ass up off that hill.
I would have left you there.
Yeah, a lot of poison ivy in there, a lot of ticks. Mm-hmm. I mean, and I'm glad you went there because, when people say David's body was found in a wooded area, I mean, that's a densely wooded area, and that's not a place where people are going to hang out. They're not going to have bush parties there. A bush party, you're not going to go there and drink or, do whatever, which I heard kids did, in their teens back then.
Sure. Yeah.
but it's not an area where anyone should be hanging out. But when I first saw the case file, it was like what jumped out at me is that David was found in this area that was not known to be frequented by area, youths. And I actually went up there myself several times. And, you only draw one conclusion when you find a body in an area like that is that, he died there or somebody put him there. He was hidden or, whatever. And I don't know why he would die there because there was no reason to be there.
Yeah, I kept saying that last week. I was like, I don't understand why he would be there. It would be so hard to get to. How believable do you think was the diabetes theory?
Well, you had two, I believe, Ivy League anthropologists. So, you had some weight behind that. And Dr. Richard Bindi, he was our forensic pathologist at the Pottsville Hospital at the time. And David's remains were mostly skeletalized. I mean, there was no flesh left or whatever else like that. So he called and reached out to these anthropologists to come and study the remains. So they were able to back it up. I mean, even when we were able to definitively say that, David died from blunt force trauma and there was like fractures on his skull, they still said he was a sickly boy. So they believe that there was like a diabetes diagnosis there. Would that lead to his death? I didn't quite buy into it. I thought this was a homicide. For a number of reasons. Well, even one big thing is just where the body was found. I believe he was hidden. So I didn't put a lot of weight into that. So, but when you read that, we spent a lot of time when we did like a victimology on Dave and we talked to his family, we talked to his friends. We asked a lot of questions about his health, what doctors he went to. So we tried to knock that out to show that, he didn't die from complications from juvenile diabetes, that he was a healthy boy. So it did influence the investigation a lot, and I didn't put a lot of weight into it.
And you just brought up something interesting because I heard that it was a shallow grave, and then the pictures you look at, it did look like exactly that. But at the same time, it was so shallow that it was either a really half-ass attempt to cover him up, or I knew all that the seasons had changed, so I didn't know if where that spot where there's like frozen leaves and sticks and bones, if that was a grave or if that was just winter,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure. So I know his body was torn. And I hate to even talk like this. It happens to a little boy, but just with the animals, obviously you had Joe Geiger's dogs bringing the bones back to his home.
Right.
But then there was like bite marks from like rats or vermin or whatever, deer, whatever, were eating at his body. But the body was actually pulled in 3 separate areas. So his skull was in one area, his torso, legs were in another. So it was, not a good scene. Whether he was partially buried, I don't know. But it was disturbed. From the elements and from animals.
Well, there were a bunch of suspects that came up, and Melissa and I were talking about some of them, and a couple of them were crazy. But Melissa, there's one that you were just blown away by.
Yeah, Kathy, do you really believe that whole blue van thing? Because I think she made it up.
I 100%. I don't think it existed. So for those that are familiar with the case, for 20 years, everybody was looking for this light blue colored van, and really that was the only lead that we had when I first picked up the case. So obviously we pursued that, and so Kathy not only said she saw him in a light blue colored van, but at some point she interjected herself in the investigation and said that she saw David get murdered by Joe Geiger.
Wow.
And at this point in time, I had never interviewed Joe. And believe it or not, if you could believe, we ended up arresting him at this stage of the investigation. I was his advocate. I cleared his name from Kathy, if you could believe that.
God.
So, but she said that his head was repeatedly smashed against a gravestone. But if you go back to the anthropology report, whatever, you would know that David didn't have like multiple fractures on his skull, or this didn't make sense. And so we brought her in basically almost like an interrogation and got her to admit that that light blue colored van didn't exist, that she did not see Joe murder him. So it was a very good day, but at the time it was kind of a bad day for me because we just lost our only lead, So,
yeah.
So they say failure is not the opposite of success. It's a part of it, So looking back at it, I might have viewed that as a failure at one point, but that ultimately led to our success for the investigation. So that was a good and a bad day all at once.
And it's interesting because you had mentioned to me that she did make a habit of inserting herself into investigations. Like, she was just that kind of person?
So she was involved like in drugs, and so she knew all the wrong people. So when these things would happen, she had information, or she had contacts and ties to a lot of that element. And I believe she was like a main witness for a homicide down there. So the older troopers, or at least one in particular, trusted her because she gave very credible information in a statement for another homicide. So when she stepped forward, and even though she lied, she kind of threw out the investigation for all those years. Towards the end, she kind of pushed us in the right direction, believe it or not.
Wow. But why lie? Especially such a detailed lie. Like, you're given license plate numbers. Like, this is a bold-faced lie. It's not even like, I think I saw something. It's a flat-out lie.
And the guy, she said he had sunglasses and bushy hair, like this whole imaginary human.
God knows how many hours were spent people trying to recreate the license plate or do everything, and
I don't get
interviewing people looking for this light blue colored van, and it never existed. So so it was nice that we knocked that out so many years later.
I told the Mrs. Ginsu story too.
And she was proud of that too. So she actually stabbed her husband with the Ginsu 2000 knife or whatever it was. They sold him for $19.99 on those infomercials. And so some of the troopers would call her Lady Ginsu, and she wore that like a badge of honor. She loved it. So it wasn't.
Did she kill him or just stab him?
Just to stab him,
maybe. Just a flesh wound.
Just aggravated assault she was charged with, but she was a character.
Well, there were definitely some characters in this case, and Bass is whatever. Like, we talked about Bass, and you and I had talked beforehand about him, but he's kind of just a traditional suspect. I mean, he met the criteria for a legitimate person to look at. But the person I want to talk about is a guy that we called Fred. And this is so being a pedophile, we did not name him, but you and I had discussed this beforehand. And even though he did some awful things, I want our viewers to hear it from you, because I tried to explain why we're not going to name him, because I feel like anybody listening would be like, oh my God, we just heard all the terrible things he did to children. He should be dragged through the mud, especially in today's day and age where it's a constant witch hunt. The second you have done anything in your past, it's dragging him up. But why was it important that we don't name him, given that he's still alive? What happens to these people?
So he was sexually abusing children in a light blue colored van, of all things, taking Polaroids and whatever. And so he ended up being charged and ultimately had to register as a Megan's Law offender. So his address, phone number, his picture, it's all online. So you could go and look it up. And I get hesitant to bring these people up. I don't want to re-victimize people, because there are people that go on that Megan's Law page, and they will look to harass or threaten or bully these people. So a little bit of anonymity for this guy. He wasn't charged. He came up briefly as a suspect. We cleared him, but I would hate to have his name associated with David's murder. So I appreciate that. So. Oh,
absolutely.
I don't know whether he's alive or not, but
just in case.
Yeah.
Well, he was a wild suspect, because not only did that blue van thing, I mean, like you said, you were looking for a blue van for 20 plus years, and all of a sudden this child predator shows up with a blue van at the time. And then also the fact that he waltzes into the police station when you're like trying to investigate him. Like, he was one of the craziest suspects that I've ever seen in a case.
Yeah. I remember I'm back at my desk, and they're like, "Hey, Rob," they're like, "Fred is here to see you, for a read or whatever." And like, my heart stopped. I'm like, "You got to be kidding me," And I just started looking into this guy, and now he shows up, and he didn't want to see me. He was just coming to register for Megan's Law. And then, we brought back, and I was asking him questions and talking to him, and but eventually we were able to clear him. He didn't have any involvement. But Andy, the guy that put us on to him, he had a daughter that was special needs, maybe deaf, maybe blind, maybe both. I'm not sure. And I believe this guy used to babysit, or his girlfriend did at some time. He always thought that he sexually abused his daughter.
Wow.
So there was, some very hurt and hard feelings there.
I'm sure.
But he did tip us off. That was probably the best lead for a light blue colored van that we've ever had.
Yeah, especially because it was imaginary.
Right.
That's the irony. Wow. Well, over the course of this case, how close did you get to David's family? Because I feel like when you're reopening a case the way you did, I know Virginia was kind of your point person, but you have to bond with the family in order to get them to trust you, because I don't know how much attention this received in those years between when the initial investigation ended, when you came along, I imagine not a whole lot. So I don't know about their feelings toward law enforcement. So I imagine when you came along, you were a savior.
I always loved my first conversation with Virginia, and I believe it was said on Cold Case Files. But I introduced myself. I think I had a small Nokia flip phone back then. They didn't have smartphones yet.
Yeah.
And I called Virginia and, said who I was. And, I was basically looking for the family's blessing. I want to take a second look at the case. And I was greeted by silence. There was nothing on there. And then I just heard her crying. And she said, I just thought nobody cared, and all these feelings came forward that somebody actually wanted to take a second look at this case. And we had to build up the trust with the family. They had to know that I wasn't going away. I was going to be there for the end, but also the community. We really had to build up that trust, and that took years to do that because David's case there was almost no work that was done on that for 17 years, 18 years, like very little to none.
Well, and that comes up with all these cold cases. Like that's one of the inherent challenges is no one has talked to these people in all those years. So like you go back and try to re-interview witnesses. Some are dead, some have moved, some are, everything. So much has changed in that amount of time. That probably adds to the difficulty.
Right. So we stayed quiet. I think the media played a big role in this case. I'll say a very understated role. But we avoided the media for maybe the first 6 or 7 months. We don't want any attention. We want to be able to do our job under the radar, and it worked. Nobody knew about it. And then we had that fateful interview with Joe Geiger, where now he makes it a mission to being present. And so we're like, okay, now it's time to go public with this case. And the one sentence I put in the news release and all that got all the attention was that significant new information has come forward. And I asked Virginia, I thought it was important that we had a family member be the face for this case, someone that can answer inquiries from the media, from the newspapers, and she did a ton. And I think it was really stressful, it was very hard for her, but I wanted the people of Schuylkill County to see how important this case was, that there was a family that still loved David, could tell stories about him. And over the course of 4 years, there was a number. It wasn't just one newspaper article. I mean, it was multiple times a year. David's story was on television. It was on the newspapers. But I think people saw we weren't going away, and that started building trust, not with the family, but with the community. And I would go back and report to Virginia every 2 or 3 weeks. She had a trailer over in Schuylkill Haven, and I would go in there and I would give her an update. Couldn't tell her everything, but, and she was very appreciative for our talks. And we got close. It was very, very sad when she died.
Before we get into her death, because there's an interesting story tied to that, but what is the point of getting the media involved? Is that to put pressure on the people who did this? Is it to just generate tips like, hey, we're reopening this if anyone knows anything? Because I imagine, putting myself in Joe Geiger's shoes, if he sees this, he must have been losing his mind because now it's like, uh-oh, I thought I got away with it all those years.
Both. We wanted pressure on him, for sure. But we also didn't know who we were missing. And then we hit a number of witnesses came forward. I don't have the lady's name memorized, but she had no connection to Dave or Geiger, but she actually saw in the days before Dave was murdered, Joe pushing him off his bike and picking on him, hitting him, being physical with him, and name calling and making fun of him. And she came forward and she was like, geez, I just think it's really odd that the person that, found his remains and was turning the bones over to the police was actually beating on him, days before. And Joe always distanced himself from David. So if you read his interviews and when we talked to him, he'll tell you he didn't know who David was, only saw him around town. And they had a much more intimate relationship than he would ever admit to. And really a big sign of guilt. A lot of guilty people will distance themselves from that incriminating item. And so the media, helped us reach new people, but also helped build trust in the community. So,
well, when you talked to Virginia about bringing this case back into the light, did you ever promise her that you would solve it? Because I know that's a big no-no, is you never want to promise anything because you don't know if you can solve this. But did you feel an obligation to her?
I never promised her that I would solve the case. I promised her that I would improve upon the investigation. I promised her that when I was done, that I would have more answers for her than her questions that she previously had. She was upset about the juvenile diabetes report, but I told her I would improve upon that. And I'm going to get her to closure as much as I can. And I never promised anybody I'd ever solve the case. once Geiger broke, we had him, and he made that admission. I knew we had our guy, and at that point, I may have promised somebody that I'm going to get this guy at some point,
Yeah, yeah.
but not initially.
Well, I want you to tell me the story about learning about her death, because it's a very unusual way that you learned, and it had to hit you pretty hard.
Oh, it did. So Virginia we had a long, drawn out, I don't want to call it an internal fight. There was disagreements about exhuming David's body. And can you believe it? This was the first exhumation in a criminal investigation in the history of Schuylkill County.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. So it was the first time it was being done. And, there was some line of thoughts that, David's body was already examined by two, prominent anthropologists. Now we're going to have a third guy. I brought in, I got Tony Falsetti. I got Tony Falsetti to agree. We had no money to pay him. So he agreed to do the case for free. He was down in Florida. But they were like, what's Tony Falsetti going to tell us that the first two anthropologists, already said? What's going to be different? And apparently there was a lot different. There was a lot of advances in anthropology over the course of those 20 years, especially with the understanding of diastatic fractures. So anyway, eventually we get to the approval to exhume David's body, but the final step was to have a family member sign off on the paperwork, and then the judge was going to grant it. So Virginia knew that this day was coming, that we're going to get the approval for the exhumation, and that was going to move things forward. So I called her house so I can go over there and have her sign for this paperwork. But much like the first time I talked to her, I was greeted with tears and someone crying. The last time I called her house, as soon as the person answered, they were crying, but it wasn't Virginia. It was her son, and Virginia had just died. He had just found the mother dead. He had just called 911, and he thought I was responding. I was coming to do the death investigation, and I wasn't. I was calling Virginia to sign off on this paperwork to have David's body exhumed. So I rushed right down, and I actually did her death investigation. For as sad as that was, so yeah.
That had to hit you pretty hard. I mean, Melissa, I didn't tell you that part because I wanted Rob to tell you, but it was so sad. Like, you're calling to provide an update on David's case, and this all happens like literally at the same time. There's so many coincidences in this case and just weird timings of things.
Yeah, we put a lot of pressure on her, and I feel, I look back at it, and, so she did like a ton of interviews. I know she wasn't comfortable going before the camera. She'd be embarrassed when she'd break down crying. She did a wonderful job. And then I know with the exhumation and bearing that responsibility, she was going to be the family member that authorized, him being disturbed after all these years. I think it really, really weighed on her, But if I ever daydreamed about David's case being solved, that dream was always, Virginia was a part of it, like to see her face at the end when we did this. And sadly, she wasn't there.
I was going to ask you that. That was when you arrested Geiger, if your head just went to, I'm sure it went to David, justice for David, but she was your kind of right-hand woman in this whole thing.
Yeah, she was. And then, after she passed, I went to the brothers and Joe Reed, and I explained to him how important Virginia was for our case. And then you'll see Joe prominently in newspaper articles, TV, whatever. He picked up the mantle from Virginia, and then he took down that role for a family where he would talk to the media. And he asked me, he goes, Rob, is this going to help? I said, I believe it will. I says, people they need to see something besides the cops talking about this case or a random neighbor, So I always thought that was important for the investigation. So,
well, I was so thankful to Joe because it was when we did that first show, The Nightmare Next Door, because it was a quirkier production, but we had to get a family member on board, and I had reached out, and it was like Joe did not want to do it. He must have taken 20 cigarette breaks during that interview, and I felt so bad, but I was so thankful that he chose to participate and talk about David because I knew they had a tight relationship.
I don't think he ever watched the show. He did it. He agreed to do it, but I don't think he was ever able to go back and watch it.
I don't know if I don't blame him one bit.
Yeah.
Wow. Well, on the subject of David's exhumation, there is another cool story that I purposely left out, and I promised you, Melissa, that your faith in humanity would be restored. I know you're skeptical.
I don't believe you, but okay.
Rob has a cool story about David and your flight to Florida to see Falsetti.
Yeah, so we had a small casket, small like a it was maybe stronger than plastic. It was
Yeah, it was like plastic. It was real tiny, like a child, like a baby's coffin almost.
yeah, like an off-white, like a small, maybe 3-foot casket. So me and Kevin had the casket. So Dave got the middle seat in between us, and we had a separate box. I hate to say this, especially with family listening, with David's skull in it, with padding, because ultimately that's what we really wanted to have examined. And then people were coming on the plane, and they're like, "Hey, what's that? Between you?" And we're like, "It's a little boy's body," And you get this nervous laughter, and they're like, "Well, what is it?" We're like, "It's a little boy's body." And then we explained to them that we're on our way to University of Florida, Gainesville, to see Tony Falsetti. We exhumed his body and whatever. So Brendan looks at me at one point, and he goes, David said he wanted to be a pilot at some point, and it's kind of sad. He goes, this is his first time on an airplane after he was gone. So the plane takes off, and a number of people had inquired about this small casket, and so word started spreading throughout the plane that the state police were on board, and there was a little boy's body on. We believe it was a homicide. There's going to be there was an exhumation, and whatever. So the plane hits its altitude, and the seatbelt light comes off, and people always get up. They go to get their whatever, check their bags. They go to the bathroom. Well, a line forms up on us, like a lot of people, and it's like a little funeral procession. They're walking by. They're like, "Can I touch the casket?" They're touching the casket. They're blessing it. They're blessing us. They're talking to us. They're like wishing us luck on this, and it was really touching. And I said, it's we saw the very best in humanity that day, and how many people cared about this. And it was a really good send off for me. I really felt positive, the energy, and I'm like, we're going to do this. We're going to bring this home. And then I also realized that this case was going to be important for a lot of people, not just David's family, not just me. And I always said I would hope that David's case would be a reminder to people that even the most difficult cases could be solved, because we had no evidence for David's case. Like, this was a very difficult, it was a long shot, They came together, but if things went wrong one way or the other, his case wasn't being solved. So I love that, and you, Melissa, are, take an interest in this still, that we're still keeping David's memory alive. It does mean a lot to me, and I know it means a lot to David's family, but that plane ride was surreal because the kid never had a funeral.
Wow.
Right. What do you think, Melissa? Does that touch your black heart?
That's really sweet. Yes, that is very sweet.
Well, and this trip to Florida wasn't for nothing, right? Now you have Falsetti that says, yes, this was, it gives you the power to change it from unequivocal or undetermined to homicide. And that's huge.
Yeah. And, me being me, when we're picking like an anthropologist, I wanted to find like one of the very best in the world. And at that point in time, I mean, for anthropology, Tony Falsetti was a rock star, and to bring him and get him involved with a homicide in a small town. I mean, this guy worked on actually the most recent airplane crash in D.C., the American Eagle one. He was involved with that.
Oh, wow.
I didn't know that.
TWA 800, the Oklahoma City bombings, the World Trade Center, 9/11, the Bosnian conflict, and he actually brought him in to determine the cause and manner of death of the lost Romanovs in Russia. So we really brought like a world-class, resume in person for David's case.
Yeah.
I was always very proud of that,
You really had an all-star team between Mann and Monge and now Falsetti. Like, man, that's a lineup.
And they lined up. They were in agreement. And I'll tell you what, all three, like, wonderful, wonderful people, very nice and compassionate people, the way they handled and treated David.
So you now have an official homicide ruling, but at one point you had two suspects claiming that the other one did it, Joe Geiger and John Fry. And I know it's not exact science, but you notice that Joe's left-handed, which is an incredible observation. So whose idea was that, and why did it matter so much?
So I don't think that's definitive. I mean, if you're left-handed, you could punch somebody on either side, but I thought it was more consistent, left-handed, and John was right-handed. But even if you look at John Fry, when David died, he was much smaller than David. David wasn't a small kid. And, and Joe was, 20 years old, hanging out with, like 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds. But just for him to be able to generate that force, to fracture David's skull, I don't think John Fry would have ever have been able to do that. And then also you had the left-handed versus right-handed thing too, which was interesting. But then Joe had other behaviors too I thought were highly incriminating. Some that might not made it to the criminal complaint or something we might have been able to testify to. But there was a litany of behavior he exhibited that told us that this is our guy.
Wow. So what did David actually die from? The punch or the fall, like hitting his head?
So I think it's a combination of both. What they'll call it is a subdural hematoma, and essentially it's a swelling of the brain, which it'll suffocate. A lot of times they can relieve the pressure on the brain by cutting it open. But Dave was probably alive, unconscious, and had medical care been rendered. Someone called 911. I'm not even sure if 911 existed in 1985.
I think it was zero. Yeah, you just called zero.
Yeah, but if help was summoned, I think David would have been alive. But just that, he might have looked like he was deceased. They panicked, they hit him, and then he probably just succumbed to those injuries. So he probably was unconscious, for a period of time, and then yes, would have been a subdural hematoma. It would have been a combination. I believe they call it a contra-cueing injury. So there'll be if you punch somebody in the face, there might be a bruise to the brain in the front, and then when he falls and hits, your brain's going to go towards the source of the impact. So you'll have a bruise in the front of the brain from the punch, and then he falls, he hits his head, you'll have a bruise to the back of the brain.
And a big part of this, and I don't mean to be crass about this, but he didn't have a brain left, right? It was hard to prove any of that. Yeah,
so we had no forensics. We didn't have any DNA. We didn't have, the clothing was exposed out in the elements for so long. I mean, so there was no evidence whatsoever. There was no skin left to say, hey, there's a black and blue mark here, or there was bleeding, or we had nothing. So,
and that's what I think people don't understand is the challenges when you're left with just a skeleton, especially one that's been out in the elements for so long and animals had gotten to it. That raises a whole other can of worms. Unless there's a giant bullet wound, it's really tough to figure out what happened.
Right. Yeah. So really the anthropologist did a bang up job, and, again, not having like DNA, not having like a video, am I comfortable that Joe was the killer, that we made absolutely, and I always love telling people, I says, Joe Geiger could have told us anything when he came in, and we kept an open mind. I still don't know whether it was a homicide. It could have still been an accidental death. It could have been horseplay. It could have been whatever. But Joe Geiger told us how David died before even the medical experts were able to tell us.
Wow.
He could have told us he was stabbed. He could have said he was shot. He was choked, whatever. He gave us a very specific circumstance where a punch to the face, fell back and hit his head off of iron inside of a train car. And the forensics backed him up 100%. It's crazy.
Yeah, because if he says anything else, it may not have helped. The anthropologists we talked about this last week, they need those context clues, because if like Janet Monge, for example, looks at the exact same thing she looked at however many years earlier, maybe she comes to the same conclusion if she doesn't have the police report to help kind of point her in a direction.
Right. And our original pathologist, he never appreciated that. He felt that those suture lines in the back of David's head would not have been fused. That was like a normal in appearance. Mm-hmm. And I forget what the anthropologists all said. There was a hallmark. Something was popped around like the side by David's ear. It was a hallmark of those diastatic fractures. But all three were like, once they saw it years later and they heard Geiger's story, it made 100% sense to them. So none of them balked at it or said, maybe, I don't know. But they all saw it once we were able to say, hey, this is what an eyewitness is telling us. And they looked at it and they're like, oh my God, and there it is.
Let's say Geiger says, hey, so he picks a random person and says, I saw him choke this kid to death. Does this case get solved?
There's, I think it's the hyoid bone will be fractured in the throat. And I'm not sure if we even had that for David, Yeah. Maybe not. So early on, when we first picked up this case, the crime corporals, my supervisors were like, well, Rob, they said, I don't know how to solve a cold case. It was my first one, It was funny.
Yeah.
But they're like, hey, you're going to start this case like it happened yesterday. So would you believe it? Like Joe Geiger was almost the first person I called because he was the one that found the body.
Yeah.
And then the case maybe doesn't get solved. I don't have all this information behind me. But as in the early stages of this investigation, you had Kathy Shop saying Joe repeatedly smashed his head against a headstone. Didn't happen. Another one was that Joe Geiger had hit David in the back of the head with a shovel.
I read
I
that.
knew, and I knew
Yeah.
that didn't happen because if I hit you in the back of the head with a shovel, your skull's going to fracture much differently than if you fall back on a high density, area in a train car.
Yeah.
So we were able to rule that out. David had a congenital defect. He had a hole in his chest. And
Yeah.
somehow that got up to some people. So they thought some people would say David got shot in the chest or he was stabbed in the chest because there was this hole in his chest. And there was. We were able to account for that, but it was, so we're hearing these stories early on and we were able to make sense of them, or we were able to, refute them, early on. And then until Geiger comes in and he gave us a story that we're like, wow, like this could actually be it, because I didn't know about a diastatic fracture before Joe Geiger came in. I didn't know that until Tony Falsetti was the one that diagnosed it.
Right.
And it was confirmed, so he told me something that I wasn't aware of. So it's pretty neat.
And it's wild that the truth is actually what got him. So all these years he hid the truth, and now he talks about the incident as if this is just what happened. I didn't mean for it to happen. But that little bit of truth that he buried in there was what helped you guys solve the case. It's wild.
Right.
Yeah.
It was interesting with Geiger because this is probably the only time I ever did this in an investigation, but I would bring the case file and I would go to people's houses. I would hand out like the missing flyers, but I put a picture of David on my case file on the outside of it. And when I ever interviewed somebody, David faced the person I was interviewing. And it became kind of neat because people would look at David, they might like bless him, they would touch him, they would bring up like, look at that stupid smirk he had, or, it brought up a memory.
Yeah.
And when we brought Joe Geiger in, he couldn't even look at David Reed. Like he looked like he saw a ghost, and like he looked quick and picked up, and he's like, yep, that's him. And it really had an unintended consequence, me doing it. And I never did it again. Don't ask me why, but actually it was actually pretty neat. But wow, what an unintended consequence that had, that he could not even look at David all those years later. It was kind of powerful for me to see that.
It's an interesting technique, and it's one of those things that you don't often hear about because it's those sly little tricks that detectives use, little things like that to get you. You can find out real quick who's like triggered by that picture and who's not. So it's almost like a lie detector in itself.
It was me being me. That's something we were never trained on. In my head, I said, whoever I talk to is look at this little kid in the face. If they want to lie to, they can lie to me, but they're lying to this kid too, And
yeah,
so it's kind of neat.
I think it's interesting you talked about how Joe tried to be like, oh, I don't know who he is. I was looking up a cold case today, and the killer did that. And actually, in a case we covered a couple weeks ago, the guy did that. And it's like, this is a small town. You know that you know who they are. Why did they do that? Why did they say, oh, I had no idea? Like, that's so stupid.
Yeah, they all distance themselves from what's incriminating. And for him, it was his relationship with David. So he figured, hey, if I didn't know this kid and people can't put me with them, they can't link me to this case. But a lot of people were able to refute that they had a good relationship. So.
Yeah. And that was one of the things you presented to him when you dropped this evidence bomb on him. You're like, well, we got about 20 people that are talking about you and what you did. So that, I'm sure, weighed on him as he was answering your questions.
Yeah, it's he came in for his interview. Well, there was a phone call before, and I called him to schedule the interview, and he called me back. Like we talked as briefly, and called me back like 20 minutes later. He's crying, he's rambling, and man, this thing's haunting him. He was lamenting. He goes, I never knew how bad a body would smell, but a body smelled this bad. And he's talking about all these random, things, and that's why we say he blinked. If this was a staring contest, he blinked. That's why I kind of was first that this is our guy. But he comes in for the interview, and the first words out of his mouth are like, hey, I'm on a time limit. I can only talk to you for like 20 minutes or so. He was there for 4 hours. But he was already planning his getaway. And later we talked to his wife. She goes, do you know he lied to you? He said he had to leave there to pick up our son. He didn't have to do that. And I'm yelling at him, why would you lie to the police, Joe?
Did she know? Did she have any inkling?
No. She was actually a very nice person. She was a nurse, totally innocent. not into drugs or whatever his background was. Like he married like a respectable person, and then unfortunately, her last name and they have a child together, are kind of tied in for this. I do feel bad for her. She was a nice person.
Do you think Geiger's remorseful?
I do. He told us that he would go back to David's grave, like he would visit. I don't think Joe ever intended to kill Dave. By no means do I think he's a good person. But he did. He killed him. He did a horrific act. The hiding was terrible, but I think there was remorse there. And I know it ruined. Obviously, it ended. It not only ruined David's life, it ended his life. It ruined a lot of the family's life. I mean, the mother had Christmas presents for the kid, and and then your child's found dead. December 15th. 10 days before Christmas. How much more horrific can your life be? That's your second child that you lost. You lost your husband. That's awful. But I don't think Joe ever had a normal life either after this. I think this weighed on him heavily.
I would agree with that.
He stopped hanging out with people after this happened. He became kind of a recluse. So we interviewed maybe 70 people of his friends, people that were close with him growing up. Not one person called him and said, "Hey, Joe, the police were talking to him, asking questions about you. We're talking about David." When I first talked to him, and I believe it, he was completely caught off guard. And not one person in our barracks thought that when we called Joe Geiger up, that we would catch him cold. They thought for sure he's aware of what we're doing, and he had no idea. But I think there was some remorse there. Not that that would never make things right, but I get the sense that there was some there.
Wow. Well, I'll tell you what, man. Is this your career case? Is this the one that will always stick with you?
Yeah, this one always meant a lot. I mean, I got to be friends with a lot of David's family. I got to meet a lot of wonderful people over the years for it. But it meant a lot to me. We put a lot of time into this. I look back, I know the odds of solving this case, we created our own luck for at times for this. Like if Joe never came in for that interview, this case doesn't get solved.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of things that could have went wrong, but we got lucky, but we put a lot of hard work into it. We caught breaks.
I think people underestimate too how that plays a role, like luck. I mean, you can do all the investigating in the world, but some things just have to go your way.
We caught some breaks in this case that if we didn't catch them, it wasn't going to happen. Melissa, I'm sorry. Let's go backpedal really quick though about the remorse thing. There was a very interesting part of David's case, and I believe the girl that we did the interview in, her name was Sue, and she kind of set us on the path with Geiger too. She believed shortly after David went missing, Joe was on the train tracks crying. She said he was in a catatonic state, just repeating, "I didn't mean to hurt him. I didn't mean to hurt him." And they're like, "Didn't mean to hurt who, Joe?" It was like this odd thing. So she believed it was over David Reed, that he came back to town afterwards and realized he had harmed him and was repeating this. So that might be your sign of remorse. But interestingly enough, she didn't know the exact date. She was a teenager, but she remembers the incident. I believe 2 weeks or a week to 2 weeks after David gets killed, Joe Geiger's father died.
Wow.
So when he's saying I didn't mean to hurt him, was he talking about Dave or was he talking about the father? That was one thing that we debated for a time. And then I think him and the father might have had an argument. I think the father might have had a heart attack or something. But then the second thing was, did Joe tell the father about what he did to Dave?
Oh, interesting.
So really neat there. And, for me, I would have presented that evidence, make the argument that, he was saying he didn't mean to hurt Dave. That's why he was crying. But, man, you had the father's death right in that area. And it was just one of those interesting things where it could have gone either way, But
I think one of the most shocking things about this case is the sentence that Geiger received. And can you kind of weigh in on that sentence? Because from what I understand, it was really a matter of, I don't think he went out there with the intent to murder that day. But at the same time, he took a human life. But then we're talking about a crime that happened 23 years earlier. There were different guidelines back then.
Yeah, nobody likes this sentence. I can't tell you I like it either, but it is what it is. But he was sentenced under the sentencing guidelines in 1985, not 2008, 2009, ultimately when it happened. And I believe he actually ended up doing a year more than...
Yeah, which blows my mind. How on earth was, even in 1985, the guidelines that light.
Yeah, because he pled guilty to a manslaughter, and this
Yeah.
and this was a manslaughter. It wasn't. I don't
Yeah.
believe it was a murder. I believe it was a manslaughter. And now when he did plead guilty, we got rid of other charges. We got rid of the abuse of corpse and things like that. But what a
Was
lot
that
of people
something?
don't.
Oh, go ahead. I'm finished.
What a lot of people don't realize, though, is that with a manslaughter has a statute of limitations. So we were way out of that by the time 2008 came around. So we had to find or be able to charge with a first degree or third degree murder. And we didn't believe this was a first degree murder. We believe it was more like a fight, like bullying and, whatever. And third degree murder, AJ Serena was the attorney on it. Great guy. I think he's a magistrate now.
Yeah, he is.
If you're listening, AJ, hello. Appreciate your work on the case. And AJ found one case. He found one case in Pennsylvania that substantiated a conviction for third degree murder with one punch. And it was a superior court case. And he goes, okay, we have enough where we could justify charging third degree. But Rob, do you believe this is third degree? And I didn't. I believed it was a manslaughter. But then he pled to manslaughter. But that third degree murder allowed us to toll the statute of limitations. There was no statute of limitations for murder. So
just from my knowledge of the case for all these times that we've covered it, I do believe that I would never want to defend a perpetrator for his actions. But at the same time, I do feel like Joe was just a bully and something got out of hand and he freaked and didn't know what to do. I don't think he went out there with intent to do anything other than kind of rough David up, teach him a lesson. And it was like, oh man, now what? And I think the fact that he kind of went in, he became a complete recluse. And I think that shows that this weighed on him heavily all those years. Yeah.
I would agree with that.
I like to think that that's more of a punishment sometimes for these people than going to prison. The fact that you have to live with this for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Imagine he looks over his shoulder quite a bit, afraid that someone's going to come after him or take a shot at him for what he did.
That's a sentence in itself.
Yeah, but the amazing thing with John Fry passed away, is my understanding. But as John got older, he was a bigger guy and a scary looking guy. A lot of other people that were adults when we were interviewing them in their 40s, mid 40s, late 30s. In all these years, and then Joe ended up out of shape. He got kind of heavy, These men were still afraid of him.
Wow.
Years later, and he was that bully, and 23, 24 years later, they couldn't get out of his head that he was the tough guy. And these guys could have probably kicked the crap out of him, but they still had that fear and intimidation from him all those years later. And that was really amazing to me. Just a grip, that he had on some people.
Yeah. Well, if there was one thing about David's case that people should know, what would it be?
Wow. Wasn't expecting that. Murder Unscripted.
Exactly.
If there's one thing that people didn't know about the David Reed case, I'd like you to know is that there was a lieutenant named Tom McDaniel, and he's the one that greenlit the exhumation and really pushed for the arrest and gave us support at the end there. And if it wasn't for Tom, the three of us probably aren't talking about this today. We had a supervisor that put his people in the best position to succeed. He believed in us. And I don't know if the family knows Tom or whatever, but there's a large debt of gratitude that goes towards him for this investigation. So, and I tell Tom, I said, if you didn't, did what you did for this case, I said, I'd be calling you drunk one night telling you, we should have solved Reed or whatever. So he kind of freed me up as a person too all these years later. Tom
is a great man. I had brought up my health. We do cold opens in the beginning of the shows before we get into any cases. And I was bringing up all these health problems I was having as we were just kind of talking, Melissa and I, but Tom reached out to me when I was in the hospital, and it was so nice to just hear. I hadn't heard from him since Cold Case Files when we tried to get him on board for that. And it was just really nice to see him. I mean, he's just a genuine person. And I was just out in San Diego. He's out there now, but I couldn't connect with him. I just didn't have time, but we were even trying to hook up for lunch or something. Great guy.
He was one of these supervisors for this case where he was in the background, but he made things happen. And yeah. So he was a very good man. But I always say I'm indebted to him, for the support he gave us back then for the case.
Totally.
And I'm not sure people would ever know that, but
yeah, because it's these behind the scenes people that don't really, his name would never appear without Tom McDaniel, it would just be something that happens behind the scenes that would never see the light of day.
Well, I'm glad you asked us. We got to give Tom some credit, so.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm going to tag him when we post this. I want him to see it too.
Yeah.
Right.
So, all right, $1,000,000 question. Nightmare Next Door or Cold Case Files? Which did you enjoy more?
Cold Case Files. I still think I got busted for the hero pose on the Discovery the Discovery
Yeah.
ID channel.
Yep.
Well, that was my next question. Do your colleagues give you shit for being on the shows?
Yeah, you're always you'll get your balls busted over it. So it's all good. Cops are some of the most insincere people you'd ever want to meet. So
Yeah, it's probably like a frat, like a bunch of brothers.
it's all good.
I wanted to bring up, speaking of things that you don't want to come out, can we talk about your nickname? Because I promised I never would again, but now I want to.
Yeah, go ahead.
What's your nickname, Robin? How'd you get it?
So people call me different things, and I know what era of my life they come from. But when I was down Schuylkill Haven, they would call me Bullet. So when someone says Bullet, I know it's from my Schuylkill Haven days, from 2003, 2004 through 2008, 2009. But Tom Robbins, he's the one who would call me Bullet, and he goes, Bullet, straight ahead, all business, But he was a smart ass, so I think it could be like a reference to Steve McQueen, Bullet, like the movie from the 70s.
Yeah.
So who knows what Tom? So there's worse nicknames you could have than Bullet,
There are, and I remember one that you told me about another colleague of yours that I'll tell you, Melissa, later on.
Got it.
And then, Virginia, it was funny whenever I'd go see her, it was always Trooper Betnar, very formal, Trooper Betnar, whatever. And I'd be like Virginia, call me Rob. Couldn't do it,
Yeah, she's being respectful.
So someone told her my nickname was Bullet. So like one of our last times together, she goes Trooper Bullet, and she had a smile on her face. So that was like, it was funny.
You're in my phone as Bullet. I'm not gonna lie.
Oh, no kidding.
I'm not. You're not.
Oh, they had old nicknames back there, like Dog Brennan. There was Sonny Boy. There was, Einstein. Like everybody had, every other nickname for that station.
That's hilarious.
Most of them affectionate, but there was a couple that, the one I told you, it was.
Yeah.
I'm not going to talk bad about people, but it was funny.
Exactly. Rob, on a personal side, what do you like to do for fun when you're not solving cold cases? And I know that we're going to get into the fact that you're an attorney now, which is crazy to me. There's a big leap there. But what do you like to do in your spare time? I know you run more than I can't get over the things you accomplish on the road.
Yeah. So I became an attorney. I've been practicing law for 18 years. So
Wow.
I did. In fact, when David's case was solved, I was in law school. And I got to tell you, it was hard paying attention to law school sometimes because I'd be thinking about David's case. I'd be running over my mind like what I had to do and whatever. I graduated near the top of my class and took the bar exam, passed. And then for a long time, I worked 2 jobs. So it was hard to find personal time. Plus, I'm a parent of 2 kids. But I always like to read a lot. I'll go to the gym where I run probably 6 or 7 days a week. So I do enjoy that a lot. I do read an awful lot. I've read a biography on almost every U.S. president. I might be missing one from the 1800s.
Wow.
And then my wife and I like to travel a lot, whether it's day trips or whatever. And I'm a museum junkie, so I always take her, something that's history related or whatever. We'll go to Nashville to see all like the music, and I'll take her to the Hermitage to see Andrew Jackson's house. So.
Yeah. Well, you probably have toured. I mean, Philly has so much history. I mean, they redid their Liberty Bell exhibit not that long ago, maybe a decade ago at this point, but everything is so nice. They really do a nice job with their historical exhibits there.
Yeah, we just did the Revolutionary War Museum. We saw George Washington's tent. That was a big, the big to-do down there for that one.
Yeah.
We stopped at Reading Terminal Station. We love it. My wife
That's
and
the
I.
best.
Yes.
Well, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you would like to add, or things that maybe a cold case that you're still on your radar that you want to help get the word about? Like anything you want to say while we wrap up?
I told my daughter, I said, should I hang a sign behind me? Like, where's Alanka Khan that had that up there?
That's one. I mean, we're so fascinated by that case.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I didn't do it. So I retired March 29th, 2024. So I did actually just talked to the one investigator, Andy Morgantini. So he actually just did an interview on Alanka's case. So it's still pushing ahead with that. Some good information still coming in. I can't talk too much about it because it's still an active investigation. Mm-hmm. But we did tremendous work, and I was very proud of that one.
I want to see that one come to a conclusion.
Yeah, that family went through a lot, for sure. And, Lanka did too. So I'd really like to see that one come forward, though. But, Dave, these cases are weird. Ed, because, we were able to solve Dave's case. We're able to talk about it. But, man, it's still a sad day, that he didn't come back home alive. It's, it really probably hurt that family over the years. So you hope that there's a sense of healing, though. You hope that the work that we did and the work that we're doing today, the three of us with the podcast, that this continues the healing process, that David's memory is kept alive. I hope so. That's my belief for it, that this does good things for the victim's family.
Yeah, that's our goal,
And even when we did the shows in the past, the cold case files and Discovery ID, I'd go to Joe or Jim or Pam, all wonderful, all very appreciative people. And I would ask them, are they okay with this? Because if they weren't, then, obviously we wouldn't do it. But I think they appreciate, the work that you're doing. They love you in your work. So,
well, I reached out to Pam before this and I said, hey, this is what we're thinking about doing. I want to cover David's case. I want to have Rob on for an interview. Are you cool with this? And she said, absolutely. And then I reached out again just a couple of days ago and said, we're a YouTube production, a visual one. Are you okay if I show David's bones? And she said, yes, absolutely. So we were happy to all of us have her blessing.
So you brought something up, and I want to bring it to your attention. And I don't know if you'd be able to go back or to show it on this episode or whatever. Get the photo of Joe Geiger where I'm walking him out of the magistrate's office, out of the barracks.
Yep.
And I want you to look at his bottom leg. And if you look at it, when we took one last shot interviewing him to try and get a confession for David's case, he took his hand and he dug and he scratched. His leg's all bloody. And he just ripped his own leg apart, scratching it. I think it was like a nervous reaction. So you look at that. When you look at the photo, look at the bottom leg, the date of his arrest. We tried to interview him for like an hour or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of can't make it up.
Yeah,
wow.
Unreal. Well, this case is definitely it's one of the more remarkable that as far as my career goes, David's will always stick out to me. And I think one, because it's so local, and you'll hear it in last week's episode, that just, I really connected with this boy and some of the things that he went through. So there's a connection to this case that will live with me forever. And I know it will with you too.
You know what? Let me give one more shout out with this before you wrap things up, is to Tony Carroll. So I know I've been kind of like for the police, I've been kind of like the face and voice for this case for the past, so many years now. But Tony Carroll and I were the one that did the bulk of this work together. So he was a county detective, but a retired state trooper. So I had 1 year in crime when I picked up this case. Tony had, I think, 30 plus years as a criminal investigator. So he was a retired state trooper, and the two of us worked the case together. So he had a nice relationship with, an older gentleman, wealth of knowledge, great investigator, and then a new guy. So we actually worked well together, became very good friends over the years. And, his nickname was the Iceman, and he hates that name.
Just cold. If I ever get to talk to him, that's what I'm going to call him. Tony Carroll was a huge part for David's case. Did a tremendous amount of work for this. That's awesome. Well, it seemed like such a joint effort, and just so many people, and the family too. I mean, it takes them as well to make this happen. So
yeah, this took a community for sure.
Absolutely.
I think it gives so much hope to cold cases. We're eventually going to find out what happened to the Beaumont children or what happened to Jean Benet. And, it just gives you so much hope that all these cases we've waited so long for, we're going to get a resolution.
I love great police work, and I root for our guys every day, so I hope to see, many more arrests come for these cold cases. They're not easy.
Oh, man, Rob, thank you so much for doing this. Thank you for participating in all the episodes over the years, and for just walking me through, for as simple as the crime was, it was a very complex case. So I appreciate you always being there to answer my questions and kind of walk me through it, and just for doing this with me.
Thank you for having me. This is my first podcast, so I hope I did okay for you guys.
You did great.
I really appreciate it. And I'll tell you what, I think we're about an hour and 20 minutes and the time flew by. I had a blast. It was great talking to you guys.
Good. You too, Rob, always.
Thanks, Rob.
We'll catch up soon.
Take care.
Okay, see ya. Was she sitting on your lap the entire time?
She's been at my feet and I've been petting her the entire show.
See, the things that go on and nobody even knows about.
Exactly. This is May, my bonus puppy.
I look at her eyeliner. I think the smoky eye is my favorite part of May.
She's got the most beautiful eyes. Oh, thank you.
Well, that was awesome. I mean, Rob is such a good dude. I love the fact that we talk on the side too, just about not David Reed, just about stuff. We become buddies over the years. So it was awesome to be able to reach out to him and say, hey man, you want to come on and do this podcast? He was all about it.
He's so sweet. I love talking to him.
Great dude. And it's a great wrap up for this Small Town Secrets block. I think this case really epitomized what we were trying to illustrate. Everyone may know what happened, or at least think they know, but people just don't want to openly come out and say it unless they're prodded. And I mean, in this case, it got justice for David after more than 2 decades. So how awesome.
I love that. I love that there's hope for all these cases.
It's true. And I think that's the message that we preached. Maybe it wasn't last week or it was 2 weeks ago, but if you're a family going through this, do not stop. Do not stop calling investigators. Do not stop keeping your loved one's face out in the media, because you see that it doesn't matter how many years pass, there is hope, and never forget that.
There is. Yeah, I think you just have to be a pain in the butt. The squeaky wheel gets the grease. Isn't that the
exactly
saying?
Right? Yep. Be a pain in the butt. Well, that, my friends, was Small Town Secrets. So we hope you enjoyed that. We hope you enjoyed David's case. And if you haven't checked out our walkthrough of Schuylkill Haven and the crime scene and where he lived and some of these houses that we were talking about, I definitely encourage you guys to do that. That dropped last week in kind of conjunction with our episode about David. So,
yes.
So what do we have next month?
Well, I'm really excited about next month. We are going to be doing The Case That Haunts Me.
Which is funny, because Rob even said that. He's like, this one always haunted me. It's like,
I know. I was thinking that the whole time. I was like, oh, this would have been more good for that block.
Well.
We're going to be talking about cases that haunted investigators, haunted an entire city in one case that we're covering. And we may even cover a case where it haunted the film crew and a documentary didn't get made because it was too much for people, which I think is a really interesting aspect. You don't think about that.
I have a new respect, too. With something I went through recently, I have a new appreciation for the collateral damage, the ripple effect of these stories. I mean, it is, I don't know, they can be heavy for a lot of people.
Yeah. Well, and if you guys have cases that haunt you, because like I said earlier, the Beaumont children haunts me. Where are they?
Yes.
Well, if you guys have cases that haunt you, we would love to know what they are. So you can hit us up on our socials, Facebook, Insta, TikTok, Reddit, Blue Sky, at Murder Unscripted. You can email us at murderunscriptedpod@gmail.com, or you can write us a note on our website, www.murderunscriptedpod.com.
That's it. That's where you can find us.
So we will see you again next week for a whole new block. And until then, be safe, stay hydrated, and remember, perverts don't wear signs that say they're perverts.
You know who's a pervert? That dog May. Like every time I'm there, I get a tongue in my eye, I get a tongue in my mouth. If I have sunglasses on, she licks under my sunglasses. Like she violates me more than I care to be violated.
But she's adorable, so it's
She's
okay.
so cute. So cute.
It's so cute. Bye.